Okay, this project looked like this about 3 years ago. I'm Jacob Wimsatt with c.w. Architects in Nashville, and we specialize in creating modern architecture for not only homeowners but also business owners. I'm here to help you through your next project, and I want to show you an example of what it looks like during the early stages of the design process. And I'm going to use this project as an example. With that said, let's jump right into it. Okay, so let's talk about the early phase of the design process. What you saw there in the diagram is an example of a pre-design massing exploration that we did on this particular project. What that is basically it's trying to understand the scale of the project before we get too far into it. The reason why this is important is because we need to understand the size of the building because we need to know whether it's going to fit within the zoning regulations. Zoning regulations is the first step, or a zoning review is the first step of our pre-design process because it's going to dictate the height of the building. It could determine the orientation of the building, the position of the building on the lot, and all sorts of other things that are going to be important to follow. The second step in the pre-design process is a building code review. The reason why a building code review is so important is because we want to understand what the construction typology is going to be. What the construction typology is essentially what the building is going to be made of. If you're doing a commercial project and you've got a lot of folks that are going to be visiting your building, it's likely that you're going to need something that's non-combustible for your structural material. Knowing whether you're going to be building the building out of concrete or building it out of wood is going to determine what your construction costs are ultimately going to be. Doing this building code review early on is important to understand what your project budget needs to be. The third step in the process of pre-design is a program analysis. Program analysis is essentially what you as the owner want the project to be. If it's a home, you may want it to be 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, living, dining, kitchen. Whatever it is, whatever those characteristics are, it's important to know those at the very beginning of the project. In this particular project, we sat down with the client and we tried to understand what she needed in the project. For example, she wanted a 1-car garage on the upper level, and this particular house has a walkout basement. She wanted a 2-car garage on the lower level. Knowing this upfront is going to drastically change how we diagram and how we organize the plan. The program analysis also includes things like the size of bedrooms, the relationship between bedrooms and bathrooms, the relationship between laundry rooms and mud rooms. All those spaces that you need to put in your home or in your project are going to have relationships both internally and externally. Knowing this upfront is definitely going to organize the plan, or it's going to make you make design decisions based off those characteristics. The fourth step in the pre-design process is a sustainability review. Now, this isn't required for every building, but it's something that is a buzz in the design industry and is becoming more important every day. Knowing what environmental aspects we need to design for is going to be important because it's going to eventually save you money when it comes to the energy cost. The sustainability review oftentimes includes things like the sun angle, where the sun is in the sky at any given point during the year. It also includes things like where is the most common point, or where's the most common direction that wind is coming from. This and all sorts of other things are important to understand because ultimately it's going to help us make design decisions that make your building more sustainable. The fifth step in the pre-design process is planning and diagramming. Planning and diagramming is one of the biggest steps in the pre-design process, and essentially it is a series of diagrams that explores not only the layout of the house, and it's based off that program, it's based off that zoning review, it's based off all that information that we've gathered, but it's also a study of the massing like we talked about before. Doing these series of diagrams is ultimately going to lead us to make better decisions down the road when we move into the design process. During this step of diagramming and planning, it's important to maintain just a very simple level of diagrams because we don't want to layer too much information too fast. Architectural design is based off of starting very broad, making very big, broad decisions, then layering on detail as we go. You don't want to be making detailed decisions like beam sizes and HVAC locations without knowing the layout of the house. You don't want to be making decisions about the layout of the house until you start understanding the zoning regulations and the site constraints. Step 6 in the pre-design process is a construction cost review. Usually we do this with a cost consultant or a general contractor, where these numbers are going to be very rough in the beginning because all we have is this data that we've collected and the diagrams. Expect your construction costs to have a large contingency on it this early in the process. As we move forward into the later design processes, you will see an updated set of construction budgets that start to reduce the contingency and get closer to our target goal. The last step in the pre-design process is design budgets. Now that we've gone through all the analysis and we've done a series of diagrams, we have a better understanding of the project. We likely know whether we need to hire engineering teams in order to solve all the problems in the building. For example, if you're using steel in the construction, you will likely need a structural engineer. That is somebody that we can subcontract for you and involve them in the design process. That way, we are the one-stop shop for all things engineering and design. A lot of homes don't require steel, and a lot of homes don't require structural engineering, so knowing all this information during the pre-design process will allow us to put together a design budget that either includes it or doesn't include it. We, of course, don't want to be putting things in the design budget that you don't need. And ultimately, at the end of pre-design, we will give you a set of design budgets that will give you an idea of how much it costs to do the architecture, interior design, and engineering. So let's talk specifically about this project a little more. The reason why it's called the Yard House is because it starts to question the ranch-style house that used to be there originally. Now that we are creating a new piece of architecture, the client is requesting that she creates this strong connection between the indoor and outdoor space. This is, of course, very common nowadays and definitely very common when it comes to modern architecture. So there are a series of diagrams that we went through that started to critique the original ranch home and then started to create volumes and diagrams that started to play into what the new design was going to be. The first diagram is, of course, the traditional ranch home, in which you had to drive the car around back to where the garage doors were. The garage door faced the backyard. Again, this created an issue when it comes to the driveway and being able to utilize the yard because the car was ultimately in the way. The first thing that we did in the diagramming is started to configure an L-shaped configuration in which the garage was facing the side yard, and then it was able to pull into the side garage. This, of course, is a very common move amongst any architecture, but ultimately this helps not only define where the car goes, separates the car from the backyard, but it also starts to create privacy from the neighboring building. This is because a garage is ultimately a very solid space. There's not a whole lot of windows in it, and it's not a very important space when it comes to the major space and the minor space. The next step that we went through in the diagramming process is we started to identify what the major spaces were. When I talk about major space, what I really mean is the spaces that the homeowner is going to use the most often. The major spaces that are most common in a home are, of course, the living, dining, kitchen, and then the primary bedroom. In this case, we took the L-shaped configuration and we began to create higher ceilings, both in the living, dining, kitchen area and in the rear area where the master suite was. Bringing these volumes up a little higher starts to create architectural hierarchy. Essentially, what that means is that when you approach the house, you'll automatically understand which spaces are more important than the others. The support spaces such as the garage and some of the laundry rooms, the gym, some of those other spaces were left low because they're not as important as the living, dining, kitchen, and the primary bedroom. The next series of diagrams that we went through was about entry and movement. Entry and movement is really about how you enter the home, and of course there are two ways to do so. You can enter the home via yourself, that is a pedestrian, and then you can enter the home via a car, which of course is a garage. The diagrams that we ended up putting together were simply a series of volumes that started to identify where the entry points of the home were. These entry points allowed us to start to dig into the form when we moved into the schematic design. The next series of diagrams that we created was about layering from the street. If you think about a traditional ranch home, it sits between the street, which is a very public space, and the yard, which is a semi-public space. This is a good way to separate yard from house, and we wanted to create that same effect. We also wanted to add to it by creating a series of layers through solid planes that further identified the difference between the public space and the private space. You can see in the diagram that we created these series of walls that start to create barriers between the public street and the home itself. The last diagram that we came up with combined all the previous diagrams and identified the most important space, which is the living, dining, kitchen. This was a tube-like structure that started to create transitions from the outdoor space that is the front porch, through the house, and then that same volume, that same tube-like structure creates the rear porch that has that connection with the yard. Now this of course is just a series of diagrams in the pre-design process, but the result is this. Now this is only created through hundreds of hours of iteration and design, and also thousands of decisions that both the architect and the homeowner make. So this is the result of the design process, and what you're seeing here is actually an animation from a rendering software. The design software that we use creates this kind of cartoon-like 3D model where we take it and we do the design, and then we go through this process of rendering the project to create this more realistic view. Okay, so I know that was a lot to go over, but that should give you a general sense of what goes into the early stages of the design process, and it should also give you a sense of what kind of ideas that we're thinking about during architectural design. I'm always up for trying to help folks out on their projects, so if you have any questions, please leave a comment. I would love to answer anything that you have. And also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a great day.